Hi, this is Dennis DeLucia, and I started drumming in 1955 at the age of 11. I saw my first drum corps show in 1957, and I've been hooked ever since. In being part of a very important project about the rudiments for the Vic Firth Education Committee, I realized that while we can document the original list of 13 rudiments and ultimately the list of 26 that was designed in the early 20th century, there is a big black hole in terms of how and where and why did we get from that list of 26 to the current list of 40 that the Percussive Arts Society has put together, or did put together, in the mid-'80s. And I realized that unless you were an active part of the drum and bugle corps scene of the 50s and 60s, you would probably not know the answer to that question. So what we're trying to do in this audio presentation is sort of fill in that black hole with a documentation of the evolution of drum corps drumming and rudimental drumming from the late 50s until 1974. Many of the new rudiments that are included in the PAS list are either Swiss rudiments or are Swiss-influenced rudiments. This first piece is called the Radak Reveille, and it was written by Dr. Fritz Berger, who was the prime motivator and designer of the Basel, Switzerland School of Rudimental Drumming. It's performed by Alphonse Grieder, who's a man that I happened to meet in the late 60s when a group of Basel drummers came over to the United States and met with us while I was a member of the West Point Band. I've always been in awe of how expressive the qualities are, of how beautifully phrased, of how important every single note is. Every phrase, every line leads you someplace. Nothing is left to chance. Nothing is played unemotionally. So the piece you just listened to is a great example of what was already going on in Switzerland. At the same time, in the United States, the drum corps movement was really starting to explore and utilize some new concepts, including in the 60s, a big influence of Swiss rudiments. We're going to play now examples of 6 short drum corps drum solos by the Cavaliers, the Garfield Cadets, St. Kevin's Emerald Knights, and the Blessed Sacrament Golden Knights. These were recorded in 1959 and 1960. Keep in mind that the typical drum line of the day consisted of 3 15-inch snare drums, 3 15-inch single tenor drums, 2 Scotch bass drums, very skinny, and 1 pair of cymbals. What you will listen to at this point will be drags, rolls, ratimacues, all run together, sextuplets. You will listen to virtually no syncopated bass drum parts. They're playing straight quarter notes. You will listen to pick-up 5-stroke rolls played out of thin air because we were not allowed to make any preparation sound in those days in the drum corps movement. So listen to those things. Also, pay attention to what was the essential cadence ending phrase of the day, and that was ratamacue, ratamacue, 7-stroke single, zigga-da-bum, zigga-da-bum, zigga-da-digga-da-bum, which you will hear over and over and over at the end of a phrase or at the end of a composition. Now we jump to 1961 and the Hawthorne Caballeros, who were the first drum corps to use timbales. Ironically, the timbale player at that time was none other than Bobby Hoffman. Bobby Hoffman later on became the genius behind the creative antics of the Bayonne Bridgemen. So Bobby is the timbale player. Here's the Hawthorne Caballeros from 1961. The significance of timbales, by the way, in drum corps were, I think, twofold. First of all, was the first utilization of Latin drums in the activity, and also the first utilization of tonal drums. Prior to this point, every drum was single snare drum, single tenor drum, single bass drum. And next we go to 1964, which is a very significant year in my opinion, because in many ways it was the end of a chapter. It was the end of this growth period that started in the mid-50s. Drum lines had grown a bit in size, but not by a lot. You're starting to hear some syncopated rolls, starting to hear some early voicing, and the voicing was somewhat more intricate than it had been in the late 50s. The Swiss influence is now clearly evident. The first example from 64, St. Kevin's. And as complex now as some of the snare drumming had become, bass drums still played straight ahead quarter notes. Listen for flam paradiddles and flammecues. Next from 1964, the Vasella Musketeers. Listen for run-on rolls and drags. Listen to how the quality of playing has improved. Listen for six-stroke rolls, which at this time was somewhat of a new rudiment, but still at the end you had that zigga-da-bum, zigga-da-bum, zigga-da-digga-da-bum, that cadence. Next, an example from the Blessed Sacrament Golden Knights, taught by the legendary Bobby Thompson. Here you're going to hear dragadiddles, the patafla-fla, and two rudimental bass drums, played with wooden bass drum mallets, which we called potato mashers. This was clearly a connection from Bobby Thompson's roots in ancient-style fife and drum corps drumming. This is actually the first of about 4 short drum solos in their program. And finally, from 1964, the St. Lucy's Cadets. Here you will hear Swiss Army triplets, dragadiddles, syncopated flam taps, but notice that they are still using a roll-off to bring the brass ensemble in. 1965 was really the start of a new era, in my opinion, in that the Swiss rudiments were now firmly entrenched as part of the vocabulary of American rudimental drumming. We started to hear some real attempts at voicing and syncopation and even some groove playing. The VFW championships were recorded indoors in Chicago at McCormick Place because it had rained for several days. So the recording you're going to hear will include the Boston Crusaders, the Troopers, and the Chicago Royal Airs. First, the Boston Crusaders, listening to some of the incredible flammed rudiments, inverted flam taps for the first time. Lots of syncopation, lots of voicing, but still 4 cymbal crashes to start the solo. It's unbelievable relative to how hip the solo is. So here's the Boston Crusaders, 1965. The Troopers of 1965 with a book written by Fred Sanford, one of his earliest attempts at writing percussion arrangements. Here featuring a tenor solo, some Swiss rudiments, flam drags, six-stroke rolls, which again at that time, the six-stroke roll was a relatively new rudiment. And finally, from 1965, the drum corps that was the finest corps that I had ever seen in that era, the Chicago Royal Airs. Listen here to the great tenor feature, lots of syncopation, dynamics, flam drags, linear split accents between the snares and tenors, and a great early attempt at groove in a terrific arrangement of Watermelon Man. 1966 produced what for me was a benchmark solo from the Chicago Cavaliers and the great Larry McCormick. This is actually the first solo in my memory that you really had to see as well as hear, because so much of the sticking and backsticking made the solo have much more presence and much more appeal than when you just listen to the notes. It was compositional, the use of tonal bass drums to imply a melodic line, incredible voicing, a wonderful tenor solo with expression and sextuplet diddles. All this stuff was breakthrough material, and it was the Chicago Cavaliers of '66. 1969, the Boston Crusaders under the great and brilliant and innovative Jerry Shelmer. This is Unsquared Ants. You will now hear timpani. There were 4 timpani players, each carrying one drum. So all the timpani parts were split. You will also hear a melodic line played on a crude set of marching bells. This is interesting because up to this point, melodic percussion was illegal. Timpani were legal, but bells, xylophone, vibes, marimba were still illegal instruments and were not legalized until 1974. So this is 7/8 with kind of a swing interpretation, and it is Jerry Shelmar's Unsquared Ants for the Boston Crusaders. And now we jump to 1971 and the incomparable Fred Sanford with the Santa Clara Vanguard. We're going to play two excerpts. One is just what we called in that era a prelude, which meant a short little percussion piece that set up a composition. Nobody was better at this than Fred Sanford. Listen to his use of timpani, textures, a long diminuendo into the brass line entrance to play Chester. The second excerpt from 1971 is Santa Clara's feature percussion solo. Just listen to how Fred's writing has developed since the mid-'60s when we played that solo he wrote for the Troopers. Fred was the leader. He really bridged so many gaps for us by making drum and bugle corps percussion an acceptable term in music education circles. This is Fred Sanford's early contribution to Santa Clara. And finally, from 1974, a composition which, in my opinion, was a landmark in the growth and development of drum and bugle corps as an art form. This is Santa Clara's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, once again, Fred Sanford. And now you are hearing full percussion composition that has meaning within the context of an entire musical score. This is, for me, a moment that I will never forget. Santa Clara's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra in 1974, the great Fred Sanford. To me, it was a benchmark in the evolution of drum corps for its orchestration, for its compositional integrity, for its utilization of statement response, or question and answer if you prefer, for its sensitive musical thoughts, for the ability to use percussion within the framework of an entire musical composition. It really set the tone for writers to follow, including those great writers of today. Well, there you have it. Hope you've enjoyed this little journey through time, 1959 through 1974 in drum corps percussion. This time period is significant for its growth in size. Drumlines went from 9 members to 15 or 16 members. The instrumentation evolved. The number of rudiments expanded, which also expanded the vocabulary available to the writers. Voicing, musicianship, phrasing, groove, style, all of that came of age in this time period. You know, in order to know where you really are today, you must be aware of where you came from yesterday. Hopefully this tape has helped you and will help all drummers and all percussion arrangers to keep exploring new things, to never settle for what you have accomplished already, to always reach for something new, a new rudiment, a new musical thought, a new sound, a new texture, a new idea. So go for it, and I sure hope you've enjoyed this journey through time. On behalf of the Vic Firth team, this is Dennis DeLucia. Thanks for listening.